Good day, everyone, and welcome to another live edition of the PAHAYAG Election Report. I'm Aurelian Suat, Executive Director of PUBLiCUS and your host for today. With Election Day a mere 2 weeks away, PUBLiCUS is proud to present the latest survey data on the state of the race for President, Vice President, and Senator. Our data were collected from PAHAYAG National Tracker April, a national survey of 1,500 registered Filipino voters drawn by PureSpectrum, a US-based panel marketplace with multinational presence. The national sample margin of error is plus or minus 3%. As always, PureSpectrum would like us to remind you that samples provided by their company are not affiliated with any bias or political party. All opinions voiced in the interpretation and analysis of the data are those of the writer or project sponsor. These results are presented in cooperation with our media partner, the Manila Times. You can learn more about the methodology of our survey by reading the public results report on our website, PUBLiCUSAsia.com. A link to the report is also available on the PUBLiCUS Asia Facebook page. And now, on to the results. Former Senator Ferdinand Bongbong Marcos Jr. continues to lead the presidential race according to our April 19 to 21 data. 57% of the respondents to our survey said they would vote Marcos for president. Marcos is the only presidential candidate who has notched a statistically significant increase in voter preference during the campaign period. He has gained 5% over the past 2 months after notching an initial preference share of 52% on our February survey. Coming in second place again is Vice President Leni Robredo, whose presidential candidacy earned the support of 21% of our respondents. Robredo's presidential preference numbers have consistently hovered between 20 to 23% on the 6 pre-election surveys conducted by PUBLiCUS between October 2021 to the 3rd week of April this year. Based on our numbers, Marcos now leads Robredo by 36%, moving into the final 2 weeks of the campaign period. Manila Mayor Isko Moreno Domagoso came in 3rd place with 6% of the presidential vote, a significant drop of 3 points over the past 2 weeks. 6% of respondents are still undecided about their presidential vote. Meanwhile, Davao City Mayor Inday Sara Duterte Carpio continues to lead the vice presidential race, earning 59% of the vote from respondents to our April 19 to 21 survey. Like her running mate, Mayor Duterte has notched a modest but significant 5% increase in voter preference since the start of the campaign period. She began the campaign period with a preference share of 54%, according to our February 11 to 16 survey. Senator Kiko Pangilinan earned 15% of the vice presidential vote, followed by Senate President Tito Soto at 9%. The two candidates are statistically tied for second place under the survey's plus-minus 3% margin of error. Based on our numbers, Duterte leads Pangilinan by 44% as we draw closer to Election Day. Doc Willie Ong came in 3rd place with 8% of the vote. 6% of respondents remain undecided about their vice presidential vote. In contrast to the relatively tame presidential and vice presidential races, our numbers suggest that the Senate race is heating up even more as we move closer to May 9. There are now 13 candidates within striking distance of the final 4 Senate seats. Chis Escudero still leads the Senate race according to our numbers, earning 46.8% of the vote on our April 19 to 21 survey. Alan Peter Cayetano came in 2nd place with 42.6% of the vote, followed closely by Win Gatchalian at 40.5%. Lauren Lagarda came in 4th place with a preference share of 39.1%, followed by Rafi Tulfo at 38.5%, Mark Villar at 33.1%, and Hontiveros at 31.9%. One of the 2 big gainers on our April 19 to 21 survey is Robin Padilla, whose preference share for senator has increased by almost 6% over the past 2 weeks. After polling at 25.7% during the first week of April, Padilla is now polling at 31.5%, entering the top 8 of our survey for the first time. Situated between ranks 9 to 21 are the 13 senatorial candidates who earned voter preference figures within the range of the 24.9% competitive zone average. They are Mig Zubiri at 29.3%, Herbert Bistek Bautista at 29.1%, It should be noted that Bautista is the other big gainer in our survey series after gaining an additional 5% of support for his senatorial bid over the past 2 weeks. Next is Chel Jokno at 28.9%, Joel Villanueva at 28.2%, JV Ejercito at 26.5%, Larry Gadon at 25.9%, Gibo Teodoro at 25.7%, Dick Gordon at 24.9%, Harry Roque at 24.6%, Jojo Binay at 21.5%, Jingoy Estrada at 19.8%, Guillermo Eleazar at 19.4%, and Gringo Honasan at 19.3%. Now joining us live to provide deeper insights into the data is the Chief Data Scientist and Pollster of PUBLiCUS, Dr. David Barua Yap Jr. Good day, David.
Ahoy!
Now, David, before we discuss the survey data, I would just like to ask, kumusta ka naman? I know you've been processing survey data more or less nonstop over the past 2 months, and that must be tiring.
Yes, you are correct. It is tiring. It is exhausting. I am tired. I am exhausted, and I am most likely over-caffeinated. But the excitement surrounding the upcoming elections, as well as the support that it seems that we have found for our work here in PUBLiCUS, has given me like what they say in Filipino, nakakawala ng pagod, kumbaga. And I think I have enough left in the tank to be able to do not just this survey briefing, but also the 2 other surveys that we are planning to launch before Election Day.
Well, that's great to hear, David. And of course, we always appreciate the good work that you do. Now, moving into the data, our survey data from April 19 to 21, what is the state of the races for president and vice president based on our most recent numbers and looking back also on our entire election survey series?
So nothing much has changed in the presidential and vice presidential races over the past 2 weeks. If we look at the survey-to-survey numbers of Bongbong Marcos, or BBM, he went up by 1%, which is within the sample margin of error. If we look at the survey-to-survey numbers of Mayor Sara, she notched a 1% increase, again within the margin of error. What is of note, however, is that both BBM and Sara notched statistically significant increases from February to April. BBM went up by 5% from 52% in February to 57% in late April. Meanwhile, Sara went up from 54% in February to 59, or close to 60% in this latest survey. Another point of interest is if we look more closely at the numbers, is that the share of very firm BBM voters rose from 70% in February to 80% in late April. Similarly, the share of very firm Sara voters rose from 75% in February to 80% in late April.
So, David, what do these increases in vote firmness as observed on our survey data, what do they mean as we get closer to Election Day?
I think it's something that all of us, at least all of us voters, can attest to, that as Election Day nears, we firm up our support, we firm up our preferences, we become more and more committed to the choices that we have made thus far. So I think that this is symptomatic of that particular, it's a very common occurrence among voters, that as Election Day nears, they become more and more convinced of who they are voting for.
Now, David, as we mentioned earlier, Mayor Domagoso notched a significant 3% decline in presidential preference between the first and third weeks of April. Do you have any insights on what may have caused this?
I think that our survey is or was in a very good position to sort of pinpoint what happened. If people take note of when the survey was conducted, it was conducted April 19 to 21. Now, if the Easter press conference was held just the Sunday before the survey period, so the survey, in a way, I think captures the fallout of the Easter press con. So, in my view, that particular press con, in a way, reinforced the findings of our survey series, as well as of the results of other reputable survey firms engaged in monitoring the 2022 national elections. Particularly, the statements made by the candidates who held the Easter press con implied that PBM is ahead at number one, Leni is in second place, and the rest of them are trailing behind. This may have given the impression, at least to some people, that some candidates are not particularly competitive heading into the home stretch of the 2022 national elections. They, in essence, called attention to their current position in the race, and in my view, the optics did not look good for any of them.
Now, David, actually, when we're talking about the whole withdrawal issue, we've actually been publishing stats on the potential effect of the withdrawal of certain candidates on the preference shares of others. This has not been covered so much in the media so far, but I think maybe we would like to take this chance to explain a little bit based on slide 17 or page 17 of the public results report.
All right. So I think that before we head into this particular table, before we discuss this table, I think it's important to disabuse people of the notion that if one candidate withdraws, then unambiguously all of his voters will switch to another candidate. It's important to note that people have different preferences, and pivotal events such as the withdrawal of a candidate would have consequences that would usually depend on the personal preferences and personality of the individual voter. Now, while this may seem complicated at first, this is actually a very simple graph once you, a very simple table once you get the hang of it. The candidates that are going to be recipients of the votes of the withdrawing candidates are found on the columns. And the candidates who will be withdrawing, right, are found on the rows. So, for example, as was the case or the hypothesis or the behind the allegations made in that Easter press conference, if, for example, Mayor Isko withdraws, then we can look at his row on the table and see how his votes will be distributed across the candidates. So, for example, we can see that a third of his supporters, at least in the respondents of our survey, would switch to Senator Lacson.
Okay. So basically, David, if we multiply the percentage of the votes received um, by the candidate under the withdrawal scheme, and we multiply that by like the total number of votes or the preference share, we'll see the potential increase in vote share for each candidate, right?
Correct, at least a rough estimate of it, given that these are essentially second choice. Just as a background, respondents were asked who would they pick as president if their first choice would no longer be continuing with his or her campaign. And what we found was that in any of the withdrawal scenarios, the calculus would more or less remain the same because respondents, while they may be firm in their support of their first choice candidates, their second choice candidates vary extensively. If you go back to the table in slide 17, what happens there is that the main candidates for consideration have second choice vote shares that are more or less evenly distributed across the rest of the candidates.
Like for example, here, if we'll stay on the slide for here, if we see, let's say for example, that Vice President Robredo would actually withdraw, based on this table, we would see that her support would be pretty evenly split across Senator Lacson, Mayor de Mongoso, even Caleo de Guzman would get a significant proportion. But if we multiply, let's her 21% of her 21% preference for Senator Lacson, let's say if Vice Leni would withdraw, then that would only result in like a 4.5% increase in the overall preference share of Senator Lacson and only
Correct.
around 4% for Mayor Domagoso.
Correct.
Okay. So basically, David, we're saying here that based on our survey data, the supposed withdrawal of any number of candidates from the race and even endorsement of other candidates may not necessarily have any effect on the rankings at this point.
Correct. Now, what is interesting to note is that if the allegations made during the Easter press conference are indeed true, the numbers in slide 17 suggest that if Mayor Isko, Senator Lacson, Norberto Gonzales all withdraw, their support would more or less be evenly split between the remaining candidates. So none of the remaining candidates would see a significant change in his or her position with the withdrawal of those candidates.
That's very interesting, David, and I think people may appreciate that we provided them a more data-based look at these proposed strategies of some of the other candidates in the presidential race. Now, going on to the Senate. Go ahead, David.
Just as an additional point, if we can go back to the slide, I just thought of something. I think that an instructive bit that can be gleaned from this slide is that if you can see, if you look closely, that there were respondents who, for example, chose one candidate as his first first choice, and then chose the same candidate as his or her second choice. So what this tells us, or what this suggests, is that there are some people who are going to be this candidate or bust type of candidate. So the withdrawal of their first choice candidate would not prompt them to vote for another candidate. So that's one of the other things that are worth considering, that the withdrawal of one or more candidates would not necessarily translate to the shifting of votes, because some people would just opt out of the voting exercise entirely because their first choice would no longer be available. So that's another point to consider.
Remaining on this slide, David, I think something that many would find interesting also is that there are a significant enough proportion of respondents who would actually choose as their second choice either Marcos or Robredo after supporting the other candidate in the first round. So basically, we're seeing here that, for example, if former Senator Marcos would withdraw, 7% of his respondents that chose him as the presidential bet, would actually choose Robredo. And if Vice President Robredo were also to withdraw, 8% of her support would go to former Senator Marcos. What can we say about this, David? Because, I mean, these two have been diametrically opposed candidates throughout the entire campaign period. It's interesting to see that some of their supporters would actually switch over to the strongest competitor of their first choice.
Yeah, this is true. There are two observations that I would like to make with regards to that particular observation. One is that if you consider the spread of the second choice preferences between those two candidates, the two candidates garnered markedly lower preference shares than other. So there are more popular second choice candidates for Marcos supporters, and there are more popular second choice candidates for Leni supporters. But there, as you said, there remains significant proportions. Now, using preference theory from economics, this is symptomatic of basically people choosing not who they prefer the most, but sort of avoiding the outcome that they dislike the most. So the calculus here is that while they may not particularly like the opposing or rival candidate, they dislike him or her less than the other alternatives on offer.
That's very interesting, David. And of course, this is interesting on an intellectual or academic level. But again, all candidates for president appear to be dead set on continuing their campaigns all the way up until the end of the election period. So it looks like these numbers may not come into play after all.
It would seem that way, yes.
So, David, let's move to the Senate race now. It seems pretty clear from our data that the Senate race is more competitive than ever at this point. What are your insights on what's happening in the Senate race, and especially within the competitive zone, which now has 13 senatorial candidates vying for the final 4 Senate seats?
Now, if we look at the big gainers in the most recent survey, we can infer that affiliation and or association with the unit team and or the administration appear to be paying off. Given the numbers of BBM and Sara, it would stand to reason that their endorsed picks for senators would get at least some of their support. If we look at the top 20 candidates, we can see that it is comprised of the bulk of the senators from the unit team. To wit, only Marcoleta is outside the top 20, and even then, he is at rank 22, just 2% shy of making the cutoff at 17%. So another point of interest is that the leading senatorial candidates appear to be much closer to the other candidates trying to secure a spot in the top 12. Escudero, for example, was polling at around 50% several months ago, but is now closer to 45%. The numbers suggest that the people are indeed firming up their slates as we close in on election day. And I think part and parcel of this would be what some people may refer to as strategic voting. They're now considering the quote-unquote winnability of their most preferred candidates and taking into consideration who they like and who they don't like. So they may be some people who are engaged in strategic voting in a way to keep some candidates out of the top 12, and thus choosing candidates who they may not particularly like, but prefer more than the candidates that they truly dislike.
Now, David, of course, projecting the actual outcome of the Senate election is significantly more difficult than the presidential and vice presidential polls. There are so many different factors to think about, but what do you think may be strong indicators of success on the May 9 polls in terms of senatoriables over the next 2 weeks?
So I think that, as I said, affinity with either or the unit team and or the administration is a key factor. Another factor to watch out for would be the endorsement of Iglesia ni Cristo. That could push any of those in the competitive zone over the hump and land them firmly within the top 12, and that could pad the distance between those who are vying for the top 12 spots. While people may say that the Iglesia ni Cristo command vote is only around 2% to 3%, given the competitiveness that has been observed in the senatorial race, that 3% could spell the difference between winning a senatorial spot and losing a senatorial spot. Another possible factor would be the strength of their relative campaigning on the ground in the remaining 14 days of campaigning. So candidates who are involved in on-the-ground operations and have extensive networks would be expected to have a leg up as we head into the final days of the campaign season.
That's exactly right, David, and I think we can expect many of the candidates to really go the extra mile or several hundred miles to campaign and get their message out for the last time before the campaign period ends next week. So that's pretty much it for today. David, is there anything else you would like to discuss or report before we go?
So as I mentioned earlier, we are going to be conducting 2 more surveys, the results of which will be released to the general public, barring any restrictions on the release of surveys. We would still have local, an NCR survey, and of course a national survey to be released sometime. It's not next week, sometime, or is it next week? Yes, sorry. With all of the surveys that I have been processing, the days are just bleeding onto each other. So I am not entirely sure what day it is right now.
That's totally fine, David. I think maybe you should take a nap after this. So I'll let you go for now. But thank you once again for your insights, Dr. David Yap. On behalf of Publicus, I would like to thank you for watching the Pahayag Election Report. To stay up to date with the latest on the state of the race in the 2022 national and local elections, please take time to like us on Facebook at PUBLiCUS Asia and subscribe to our channel here on YouTube. We will see you again soon for the release of our next survey results. Thank you again and have a great day, everyone.